Good morning, good afternoon, or even good evening, depending where you are. Welcome to today's web seminar, Creating a Seamless Customer Experience Across All Your Commerce Channels. My name is Ron Gabobla, and I'm part of the industry marketing team here at NetSuite. I'm pleased to be speaking to all of you on this seminar. I'll be joined by a few other guests, and I'll introduce those guys in a moment. But first of all, let's go and walk through the quick agenda. So first of all, we'll be talking about the seamless consumer experience and omnichannel disruption. Talking about getting to one system, one network, and what that all means. And then we'll have a panel discussion. I'm pleased to be joined by two distinguished guests from two customers who will describe their own experiences. And then, of course, we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. And, of course, if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to go ahead and write those in. And as I mentioned, we'll answer those we'll answer those at the end. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So in terms of featured speakers, you can see myself there on the screen. I'm also joined by David Novak, who's the Executive VP of Business Development for SPS Commerce, and two customers, Jim Weinberg, who's the President, and it says CMO, which is not Chief Marketing Officer, but rather Chief Merchandising Officer for Beyond the Rack, as well as Bob Jellison, who's the Director of Technology for Dynacraft Bikes. Later on, when we get into the presentation, we'll give a chance to let them introduce themselves and what their organizations are all about. But with that, let me go ahead and give a quick introduction into who is NetSuite, and then have David talk about SPS Commerce. So if you're not familiar with NetSuite, we've been around for quite a while, not just a fly-by-night operation. It's been almost 16 years since we were founded. We're publicly traded, over 2,400 employees. But probably the most important thing that you should know about NetSuite is that over 20,000 organizations worldwide trust NetSuite to help them run their business. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, used over 100 countries, and is the world's most deployed cloud ERP solution. David?
Thanks. And from an SPS standpoint, we're here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, publicly traded on NASDAQ. We've eclipsed the 800 employee mark. And boast the industry's largest retail network. We're 100% cloud services and a great fit for NetSuite. So, why don't we jump into this elusive challenge of creating a seamless consumer experience? So, let's start by taking a look at some data recently captured by SPS Commerce on our annual retail benchmark survey. So, this idea of a seamless consumer experience in this omnichannel world is equally important to retailers as it is to brands, suppliers, manufacturers, and distributors. Truthfully, there is an insane level of entitlement that we've created in the minds of consumers, which, from the perspective of a consumer, is a great place to be. See, we control the keys to the shopping kingdom now, but our expectations are astronomically high. We expect the products to be available whenever, wherever we want. Talk about being spoiled, we can create entire department stores in our living room. We can buy automobiles in other states that can be delivered to our homes, have gourmet meals and groceries prepared and delivered right to our front door whenever we want. We have this endless aisle shopping experience where things can be shipped immediately, frequently for free, at price points that we want. And when it arrives, if it's not really the product we want, we can return it very easily for free. And we can even bring it back to the store and exchange it there. This is an unprecedented era in this space, and consumers have largely driven this change. The problem is the people who have responded to it and raised the bar even further are really the big .coms. And that's forced all of us who live in the retail supply chain to make rapid changes on how we compete, forcing us to really look at how do we create a consistent brand and a consistent shopping experience regardless of where that consumer is? So for us, it's really become a matter of survival, and it's definitely one of the most disruptive movements that our industry has ever seen. So let's take a look at some of the realities about how consumers buy. This has changed so fast, it's hardly even fathomable that this was going to be the case when you look back even just a few years ago. Let's take Pinterest, for example. These guys launched beta in 2010, and there were a handful of developers operating out of some guy's apartment. Their iPhone app was launched in 2011, and in the course of just a couple of short years, they went from 5,000 unique users to over 11 million. That's 11 million users. Well, in 2013, 47% of digital consumers made a purchase based off of their experience on Pinterest. Again, this is something that didn't even exist 3 years ago. Think about the impact that that has on the way the supply chain has to feed that purchase. Continuing on the trend here, if you look at Pinterest revenue per click compared to Twitter and Facebook, it exceeds both of those, which are notably an amazing place for people to shop and find things that they like. Of course, we all know about Amazon or Google. 43% of all purchases begin on Amazon or Google in a .com world. We search for items, we find them, we purchase them, we get them for free. And then finally, you think about mobile sales. iPads, if you just think back 6, 7 years ago, they really didn't exist. And now they're just a household item, and everything we do is on an iPad or an iPhone or an Android device. Mobile sales reached 21.8% of total online sales. It's 43% year over year. So what does all this mean, and what is this craze telling us? Is this a trend, or is it a major transformation, and how does that impact the way we look at our business? Well, from where we sit, we think this is a major transformation. This is not to get over dramatic, but the facts are pretty hard to refute. There is an evolution underway that is transforming the way we procure, merchandise, ship, deliver, and service consumers with the goods that we make. So let's talk a little bit more about what omnichannel really means. A lot of definitions out there. The way we view it is we're trying to achieve a consistent consumer shopping experience regardless of where that consumer chooses to engage us. And that is true for retailers, and it's true for suppliers. It almost is true for 3PLs too. It almost doesn't matter where you live in the supply chain. We have to find a way to create that consistent brand image and that consistent consumer shopping experience across devices, across locales, independent of geography, independent of operating systems, because that is what the consumer has come to expect. So those are definitions. So let's talk about how we turn this into more of an offensive play. Starting back 5 years ago, this is something that everybody was kind of worried about. Walmart was the big concern. Today, people worry about Amazon. And not just Amazon as a company, but the Amazons of the world, because they've changed all this. So a lot of folks in retail have resorted to more survival tactics. How do we figure out how to mash together digital presences? How do we figure out the social media game and try to capture a consumer there? Not something that a typical retailer has ever had to worry about. And what do we do about a mobile presence? Can we just create some kind of an app on a phone that allows people to buy? So these are all the things that retailers have been trying to think about over the past couple of years. And so if you look at what was important before versus now, retailers thought in terms of the perfect order. They were dealing with thousands of items, and their inventory was their inventory. And when they filled, it came out of their inventory. Today, that's different. People think about perfect fulfillment across order management models. They're trying to get to millions of items, not just thousands. And the inventory perspective is one of shared inventory. How does the retailer create an inventory picture to the consumer that is consistent across their inventory in the store, their inventory in the DCs, their inventory at their vendors' DCs, the inventory at the third-party logistics firms, the inventory in transit? This is how retailers are having to think about this model to react to this change. So a little more on that perfect order. The gold standard looked like this. The perfect order was one that was on time, it was filled complete, there were no damages, and all the information that the retailer needed to receive those goods was there in advance before the goods showed up at the location. This right here was the gold standard. And when you're dealing with a ship-to-DC or ship-to-store model, most of us who have been in supply chain knew how to do this, for the most part. Today, it's very different. We don't think about the order. We think about the fulfillment. That is the completion of the order. And to do this today in this omni-channel world requires a whole mess of new things that the consumer is mandating that we provide. If they're not in the store and they're online, they need to have complete product information. They need that electronic or digital brochure. They want to see who else is buying it, who's returned it, how they've rated it. They want to know that the inventory truly is there to be filled. When I order it, don't send me an email the next day that it's back ordered 2 weeks. That is a bad consumer experience. They want to pay what they want, has got to be fulfilled very conveniently, got to be returned conveniently, and Lord knows they don't want to pay for shipping. This today is the gold standard, and it affects everybody on the right, the supplier, the brand, the retailer, the third-party logistics firm, the carrier, forcing an unprecedented level of collaboration throughout the supply chain just to compete with the Amazons and the Zappos of the world. So let's take a different view of this, because what this has done is put immense focus and the spotlight on items and assortments. So earlier I mentioned that people were thinking about thousands of items in their stores, and now they're thinking about an order of magnitude larger than that. More items to fill the assortments. They want to procure and provision them faster, and they want to pay less for them. Because if you're going to go from 1,000 items to 1,000,000 items, you don't want to have to carry all that inventory, and you certainly don't want to have to pay that much, and you think you can get, volume discounts for the purchases. So here's a great example of a company that has taken a different look at this. Andy Dunn, quote, says that consumers are buying items, but designers and merchants are the ones thinking about the collections. And this is true. Just think about your most recent shopping experience online. We buy items. When you were on Google or Amazon, what did you plug in to look for? Did you plug in North Face? Maybe you did. Or maybe you plugged in North Face jacket that's breathable, Gore-Tex, waterproof, and rated at 0 degrees. You were looking for something specific, and those attributes about that item were what you were after. Sure, there's brand loyalty in that, but the loyalty is probably more to the manufacturer brand than it has been to the retailer brand, because you can get that item in so many different locations. This is causing pain for retailers. Now, the retailers, in response, are trying to think about their collections and their assortments. So their job is to get as many items into those assortments as they can, organize them into collections and into categories so that you can find them very easily through their interfaces to you as a consumer. This is the way that it's working today. So let's just take a look at this evolution. Walmart, typical store, is about 150,000 items in it. Target, not too dissimilar. Walmart.com has about 9 times that, 100 million items that you can buy on Walmart.com. Well, what are they competing with? Amazon, 300 million items. Talk about entitlement. You can go to Amazon and find anything that you want, anytime you want, anywhere you want. I'll tell you, if my kids had that, we'd be doing some serious discipline. This is one of those scenarios that is forcing us all to think about the way we operate. So, the reality is, in response, everybody not named Amazon, who spent the last 100 years getting to 100,000 items, is spending the next 2-3 years trying to get to millions of items. This does not happen overnight. For this to happen, there's so many things in the supply chain that have to happen. And it is fostering this age of collaboration between buyers and sellers that we simply haven't seen before. So, let's talk about those items in a little bit more detail. A typical shirt might have 12 attributes, a refrigerator 84 attributes. These are only ones that the consumer is particularly worried about. But in a .com world, or a dropship world, or an e-commerce world, those attributes that describe those products become exponentially large, from dozens to hundreds. Because of the way things are picked, packed, and shipped across very different order management models, DCs, stores, and direct to the consumer's house, this is the kind of information that is now being required. Most item management systems don't even house this much information. And certainly the retailers are trying to figure out how to get themselves in a situation where they can handle this kind of item attributification, and be able to marry that back with the vendor's items. So they get clean orders that are complete, fully attributed, so the consumer can see and get what they want, and they know how to handle the goods through the supply chain. This is an immense level of complexity that is required for a superior shopping experience. And of course, plenty of studies have been done here, but this chart simply shows that a consumer is shopping, the more attributes, the better. You go on anybody's .com site, you want to be able to spin the image around and look at 7 different views and perhaps play a video. These are all super important things, and it's well documented that the more adequate this information is, the more sales that you generate. So we've kind of covered the whole order management thing as a result of omnichannel, and now we've kind of covered the items thing on omnichannel. So let's talk about inventory. So now you got all these items assorted, you know how to do your fulfillment, and now you've got this inventory problem. Who owns it? Well, this idea of mine, yours, and ours is a reality because everybody wants to know, can I fill the consumer's request? Great, you want to create a seamless shopping experience, you got a wonderful application on your mobile device, they order it, oh, sorry, my inventory data was wrong, can't fill it. Why not? Well, because you didn't know where all the inventory lived. Was it in the store 5 miles down the road or in your vendor's 3PL that could have shipped it right to the consumer if they were set up for that? This, again, is fostering a new level of collaboration on inventory. So back to these demands from the consumer side, the result is that suppliers need visibility into what's going on in store-level sales and inventory to help keep products ready to fill, to counsel their retail buyer on what items they should be putting into the stores and buying and shipping to the stores. And the retailers also need the vendors to have that, simply because of the scale that we're talking about. Remember, we're going from thousands of items to millions of items, which means tracking inventory for millions of items. The buyer doesn't stand a chance. The merchandisers don't stand a chance unless they offload and share some of that responsibility with their vendor community. This is new. We've gone from sticks to carrots, and this transformation is a reality in response to this omnichannel movement. So, all you sitting there going, gosh, we haven't done anything to this effect. Well, don't worry, you're not alone. Our surveys say that about 4% of retailers and suppliers have actually fully executed on some form of an omnichannel strategy. Why? Well, it's hard. And I'm going to hand this back over to Ranga here to illustrate some of the technology challenges that you have to confront in order to get ready for this omnichannel evolution. So, Ranga, the floor is yours.
Thanks, David. So if you buy into what David has framed in terms of omnichannel disruption and seamless commerce, if you buy into this notion that you have to have a consistent experience across what you're providing in store, your catalog, your online presence, as well as the call center, you buy into that, what's the barrier that prevents people from executing on that? And I think what you find is the reality of the system picture that backs each of these different elements. A series of disconnected systems, and to quote David, with brittle connections. And those brittle connections are a direct barrier to the nimbleness that an omnichannel strategy requires. If you look at it even further, and you go back into the back-end side of things, the ERP system, the commerce system, the call center, and look at how are these pieces put together, right? You've got shipping, Salesforce automation, support, and financials in the warehouse. But then you also have your customer management, your case management, your warranty info, and your website, your order management and marketing. And when you come back to that idea that in order to really drive that seamless commerce experience, all of these pieces need to be tied closely together. But the reality is what you see on the slide, these brittle connections between each of these elements. And so when you're trying to drive that consistency, when you're trying to drive nimbleness in your operations, these are a direct barrier to that. So part of our philosophy is how do you bring these pieces together? So first of all, it's unifying each of these elements. As you talked about moving more towards an item-centric world that David presented, you're bringing together merchandising, orders, your product content, your inventory, your fulfillment all together in order to help enable that. But then add this one step further. You want to make sure that it's also tied into your customers and your promotions so that when people are looking at it from a catalog perspective or they're talking to a sales rep or they're on the call center, that they've got the same, that a customer going through any of those are getting the same set of offers and getting the same experience. But you've got to even go one step further, which is the more and more movement to marketplaces, things like Amazon and eBay as that marketplace notion, but the web store, the mobile experience, and the in-store experience as well. Because you don't want one experience when you go in the store and another when you go on your mobile phone. And people are just going to pick whichever one is best for them. Now, if you buy into that, though, The biggest thing, though, is you have to think about tying in, you have to think about the manufacturers and suppliers. You can't go about this alone, but rather you have to think about, how do I make sure that I tie in my manufacturers and suppliers? So if you're a retailer, you've got to think about, how do I connect back with my manufacturer suppliers? If you're a manufacturer supplier, you have to think about being part of the picture with your retailers. David, I know you have some thoughts on the network and how that fits into this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just tapping into this idea of this collaboration concept in the supply chain, the idea that you could be connected with your system of record to a network of trading partners that you already are doing business with or wish to do business with creates a nice foundation for expanding those relationships to meet your new supply chain needs. So let's just take a look at kind of the world most people live in today, with the hairball and the systems and then the network problem. So Ranga talked about all the different systems on the right, and now you've got to tie those systems into your trading partner community on the left. The typical approach to this is to build point-to-point, map-to-map, integration to integration from each system that you have that is a system of record to the various trading partners on the other side. And of course, if you buy into this omni-channel thing, you're not dealing with half a dozen trading partners here. The trading partners mount into the hundreds, because you've got your carriers and your logistics providers, you've got factories, you have your own manufacturers, brands, retailers that you do business with, perhaps sourcing companies. If you're sourcing overseas, you may have QA firms that you have to worry about. So this idea of, wow, everybody else has already kind of done this. Why can't I leverage it and share it? And if I do that, then this idea of moving to one system to operate my business becomes much more of a reality that I can get benefit out of. So let's look at what the picture is with NetSuite and SAP and SPS Commerce. Here on the right, you've got NetSuite, one system, single data source, all your apps together, one way to look at your business. It satisfies everything that Ranga was just talking about. Fully integrated to the network on the left, where SPS Commerce is in the picture. The way that we have done this, it actually allows NetSuite to inherit the trading partner community that you're accustomed to doing business with. So that means you're pre-wired to tens of thousands of trading partner relationships where you can actually start moving more towards a business dialogue and be less worried about trying to integrate with each and every trading partner that you want out there. This is a proven solution. We've been doing this with NetSuite since 2007. NetSuite solutions have gotten stronger, and SPS's network has gotten larger. And this is the way to try to get yourself into a place where you can be nimble to adapt to this omni-channel demand. So, before we hand this off to our illustrious panel here, the whole idea behind an SPS Commerce and NetSuite solution, one that Bob and Jim are going to discuss shortly, is that there is a cultural change that needs to occur to accept the fact that, man, we have to get on board with this evolution, and we need partners that are rooted in this insight of a complete retail supply chain solution that gives you that opportunity to have a seamless consumer experience. Allows you to engage your customers the way you want so you can deliver that. That is a real important part of getting yourself in position to make the changes you need. But technology alone is not going to satisfy this. There are organizational and cultural challenges that are imperative for you to make this happen. So with that, Ranga, I'm going to hand it back to you, and let's go ahead and open it up to the panel.
Perfect. Thank you, David. Yeah, and I think it's a perfect lead-in. As David said, it's not just a technology issue. It's also a cultural issue. And we thought, what better way to help bring that across than two great speakers from our customers, Jim Weinberg, who's the President and Chief Merchandising Officer from Beyond the Rack, and Bob Jellison, who's the Director of Technology from Dynacraft. And I think the intention here is to go through and talk with them a little bit about some of both the cultural journey that they've taken and the technology alignment that they've done in their own organizations. But before we dive into that, why don't I give Jim an opportunity just to go ahead and introduce us to Beyond the Rack. Jim, can you go ahead and just give us a little bit of a quick background on who Beyond the Rack is?
Yeah, sure. Sure. Beyond the Rack is a flash sale company. We operate throughout North America, both in Canada and the U.S. We're based in Montreal. We have over 13 million members at this point. And we launch sales 3 times a day. It's something we've evolved to, so generally at 9, at noon, and then sometime at night, either between 4 or 6 p.m., depending on the day. And we carry all products from apparel, accessories to home.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim.
Sure.
And Bob, if you can give just the same quick intro into Dynacraft, that'd be great.
Sure. Dynacraft is a designer of bikes and electric ride-on toys, and our primary customers are Walmart, Amazon, Toys R Us, Target. We have, think of us as a traditional wholesale distribution group that happens to also design and with close manufacturing partnerships, and we market and we perform sales activity related to the sale of those goods into these primary mass merchandisers, mass markets. So we've been doing this for a couple of decades now. Our business is evolving into a phrase I actually heard for the first time at Suite World this year, B2B2C. So drop shipping is new to us, and we're actively engaged in that. We've got business to consumer, true e-commerce on the horizon, and we've, of course, got traditional B2B EDI activity taking place as well.
Great. Thanks, Bob. So with that, what I want to do is spend the next 20 minutes or so and really go into kind of a few questions just to give you guys an opportunity to provide the audience with what your experience has been. And where I want to start off is Jim, maybe we can start with you, and talk just a little bit about, I know you've given kind of the intro on who Beyond the Rack is, but can you give us a little bit of perspective? How has your business changed? So I know David brought up Pinterest. You brought up, for example, just the last 3 years. Can you talk a little bit about how your business has changed and how the expectations have changed in your business? I know you talked about evolving to the 3 flash sales, for example.
Sure. So, the business has evolved over time as consumers have become more familiar with a flash sale model. I would say that, obviously mobile has changed the way we interface with our customers the most in the last couple of years. So when we started the business, we had no mobile technology at all, and now over half our business is coming from some type of mobile platform. And to that end, even when you look at mobile specifically, it 3 years ago, or even 5 years ago when I started the business, it was all about iOS devices and how do we have an app. And now the Android part of our business is exploding, and it's like, so when people ask me questions about, well, what are your technology needs going to be in 5 years, and how do you estimate that in terms of budgeting? I can estimate the spend in terms of budgeting, but exactly what we're going to spend it on, I have no idea, because I would have no idea that Android would become this important to our customers. As a company, as an example, we used BlackBerries a couple of years ago, and there was no thought of coming off of that as a company. But the way we reach our customer has changed so much over time, and it will change again. And you just have to really be nimble and look at, sort of what the customer expects. One of the things we were talking about when we were setting this up is sort of what omnichannel means to people, and it really means that it is the same thing. The business looks the same to them on however they choose to access your site. And I think, whether you're a brick-and-mortar store with an e-commerce channel, it still has to be the same experience.
Bob, what about for you? Because you're kind of on the other side of it, so to speak. But you mentioned even kind of this evolution of your own business to a B2B2C business where you're going direct to consumer a little bit. How has your business evolved and changed over the last few years?
Well, really, B2B2C has really been in the last 12 months. We've pursued this, and our primary relationships there, again, involve Walmart, Amazon, Toys R Us, and Target. So we really saw this as an evolution of the partnership pre-existing partnership that we had with these companies, with these trading partners, where we did traditional wholesale distribution. The expectation from our perspective is that we'd be able to take it a step further and be an extended partner with them on this B2B2C channel, where they are literally booking more sales than they can fulfill. They need partners that can step up and deploy the systems that are necessary to basically correct the issues they have in terms of flow through and getting product to the customer within that that short time frame that's really expected today. So we've had to really change culturally from a wholesale distribution company that has its own sense of time to a company that operates much like an e-commerce company today, where we get orders and literally within a few hours we are shipping them, and we are meeting all the expectations, the SLAs, and really we have to adapt the same type of customer service mindset that our trading partners have, so that we treat the guest seamlessly in terms of fulfilling and delivering these orders.
Makes sense, Bob. And when you so obviously you said you've done this in the last 12 months. You've added this element. So this has been a journey for you guys. Can you kind of walk us through a little bit of the technology journey? Kind of what was kind of the trigger for you guys that we've got to change what our current environment looks like in order to kind of enable this change, and then kind of the steps that you guys have been taking to get there. Because I assume it's not just you didn't just snap your fingers and suddenly it was done. I imagine there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that you had there.
Yeah, I mean, from a high level organizational standpoint, we understood that the platforms we had in place would not scale and basically support the vision we had for the company. We went with NetSuite and SPS Commerce to basically provide the platform, the architecture that basically could handle the direction that the company felt was critical in terms of our long-term survival and the direction that we needed to take to remain competitive in our market. So we've really changed everything from core ERP, warehouse management systems, EDI providers. Everything has changed, and so the framework we have in place now, if you take it, so that work basically took place in 2011, 2012. And beginning in 2013, we started pursuing this. Because of that framework, we started pursuing the drop ship relationships, the direct-to-consumer relationships with our trading partners. And because of that framework, again, we're able to work with SPS Commerce to basically set up new relationships involving Toys R Us drop ship, or Walmart drop ship, or Amazon drop ship. So we set up new connections, new relationships, and from a platform standpoint, those orders then flow directly into the NetSuite platform, and we process these orders side by side with traditional, what we know as traditional wholesale orders. So you have one area of the warehouse that's processing box by box to essentially fulfill to the end consumer, the retail customer of these various websites. And then you have the other areas of the warehouse that are doing wholesale distribution involving trailers full of bikes and electric ride-ons. So we've been able to really take on the challenge of dropship, the B2B2C, and we're poised, from a future standpoint, to pursue our own pure play in terms of business to consumer involving SuiteCommerce Advanced. So we feel like we're structured right. We think we've got the right partnerships, we've got the right architecture to really move forward and to be aggressive and be competitive on pursuing those things that are critical for Dotacraft.
And Bob, I just want to ask kind of one follow-on to that. Was I think you may have said this already, but just to be clear, was that a push from your retailers to you on this, adding in this dropship element, or was it a pull? A push from you guys to them, or a pull from them asking for this?
I think from a relationship standpoint, it was more of a push to us. It was a capability that had been asked for, and quite candidly, one we had avoided specifically because of limitations involving systems. So again, from a long-term, big picture, the relationship, it really needed to happen, and we needed a position to be able to support what really, plainly speaking, was a requirement and an expectation from our trading partners.
Makes sense. Thanks, Bob. Jim, what about you? Can you on the similar side? Obviously, it's a slightly different business model. You're on the retailer side. Can you talk about some of those challenges in that same journey that you guys have taken? I know you mentioned kind of some of this journey into the mobile side of things, but can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we as the business has grown and scaled, the relationship between us and our vendors and the amount of product that we want to carry based on the large membership base that we have has sort of exploded. So one of the things that we are now doing is onboarding, through SPS, a tremendous number of manufacturers that can drop ship home products for us. So we're starting in home, and it will expand, really leveraging the SPS network, but other people that we also do business with. So going through our NetSuite platform, but leveraging the strength of SPS so that we can onboard a tremendous number of vendors that they already do business with. The plus for us is, obviously they already exist. They know how to, they've been vetted and they know how to fulfill, so we don't have to worry about, negatively impacting our consumers. And on top of that, they are people that we can quickly look at in a much faster manner of what types of product they carry and how they, who they sell and how they interact with their customers. And in addition to that, the fact that, through SPS they already are set up on EDI, so we don't have to worry about any of the onboarding things that we normally do when we find new resources. That's a tremendous opportunity for us to offer, hundreds of thousands of additional, if not millions of SKUs to our customer. So part of our business model going forward is we're just in the infancy of setting it up, but it will be fully functional within 60 days as a part of our site called the Outlet. And what the Outlet is basically this, marketplace of product that sits out there that's obviously searchable from the outside world of drop shippable products. So we see this drop ship piece of our business being really the growth vehicle for us going forward.
Makes a lot of sense. Jim, just to kind of switch gears slightly, there's been some questions coming in that are coming from the audience, and I want to give an opportunity to ask those questions.
Sure.
One of the questions comes in, which is asking about, and this is to both Bob, to you, and to Jim, but Jim, if you want to answer it first, which is what systems and software did you come off of to kind of your current environment?
When we went onto NetSuite, you mean?
Yeah, it's really asking where we were sort of on.
We were on sort of a Excel-based Mickey Mouse, like how do you hold things together with spin and glue? And the company, from our initial business plan, grew much faster which is a good thing, than we initially anticipated. And within our first year, we were sort of looking at each other with our CTO at the time, saying, "This is impossible. Like we can't keep running a company basically on no platform." So we took the leap of faith and went to NetSuite because it offered us, sort of a plug-and-play, very adaptable platform, and it's been able to grow as our business has grown as well. So it's, one of the things that's worked for us is it's pretty adaptable, and then there's other businesses like SPS that we've been able to plug into. So part of how we've grown is, for whatever reason, I don't really know why, we talk about this, like why was this decision ever made? We didn't use people's UPCs when we started the business. So that's part of why we plugged into SPS as our initiative into using vendor UPCs where possible.
Makes sense. What about you, Bob? I think you guys had a slightly different environment.
Well, I think we had an environment that may be familiar to a lot of people. I mean, we had multiple versions of ERP. We had a legacy WMS solution. We were running multiple versions of Microsoft SQL. Our ERP was actually Microsoft Dynamics. But the environment was really one that we couldn't upgrade it. The impact or the risk to the business was such that it was more risky to attempt an upgrade than to leave it alone. And it was just a scenario where there was a lot of risk that grew every day, and we went after that's why we went after every bit of it. The ERP, the WMS, and the EDI. I mean, those three pieces. Being able to push those to the cloud really were just a dramatic change for us, and has enabled us to the point we're at today, which is, from my perspective, very strong and very well positioned moving forward.
Makes sense. And Bob, there's a couple more questions that came specifically to you, so I'll ask those now, which is, Bob, is your traditional wholesale demand coming to you through SPS to NetSuite, or are you still receiving orders via standard EDI?
Okay, our orders, all of our order activity, the connection is really, think of it, Dynacraft to SPS to trading partners. So everything pushes through SPS Commerce. So the EDI 850 purchase orders, speaking in EDI land, the EDI 850 purchase orders that are originated by the buyers at these various trading partners are transmitted to SPS Commerce. They take care of all the connectivity, all the VAN connections, all the technical mapping that needs to take place. And then, one of the beauties about the cloud is, these are web services, website to website connections where they're communicating. So once SPS Commerce has that inbound purchase order, they then automatically connect into our NetSuite account and essentially create a sales order. So every week we come in, we've got thousands of orders that, nobody's keying those in. Trust me, those are coming automatically across the line.
And then all the new activity that you're describing with the dropship side of things, same thing. It's not like those orders essentially are operating in that same way.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's kind of a hybrid answer, Ranga. So for almost everybody that we're doing drop shipping with the exception of Amazon, we have been able to basically take them to what we refer to as integrated EDI. So for Walmart, for Toys R Us, for Target, all the order activity that comes in related to the dropship channel comes in via EDI 850, and it creates sales orders in NetSuite, which we just go ahead and fulfill. Amazon has been it's a relationship thing where we're trying to get integrated EDI with them, and we're communicating with them literally weekly to try to get on schedule and to get into their project alignment so that we can do it. It's not an issue of can SPS Commerce do it. It's a matter of when will Amazon allow us to do it. So it's something that's high on our priority list. We're not there yet, but we hope to be there soon. Makes sense.
Jim, I want to come back to you and ask the question. You described you brought up the example of BlackBerries, and 5 years ago, we would have the decisions we made looked very different than what you're making today. How are you in your role and as you're directing and guiding Beyond the Rack, thinking about kind of the whole future proofing of the business? So how does this fast change and it's getting even faster? How do you guys think about that, and how do you drive that?
I think the way we've always gone about it is we try to be as consumer-centric as we can. And one of the things that's interesting in being in a company that's relatively young is when we started, we always used to ask the question, well, how does this affect the customer? And then in sort of our, I could term the toddler years, like when we were 3 and 4 years old, we sort of stopped asking that question and in the last 18 months who've really gone back to it. So it's hard for me to really answer your question specifically. We just try to stay as focused as we can on what our customers are telling us. So, sort of like what Bob was saying, people now, when he's getting his EDI transmissions of his orders, people expect to get an inbound email within 48 hours that the stuff is shipped. And, 4 or 5 years ago, if you got an email 5 days later, you'd be like, oh, okay, that's normal. So people's view of normal changes over time, and it changes, exponentially. So, I'm not exactly answering your question because I don't really know the answer myself. All I know is what we try to do is just sort of look at what the outside world looks like and what our customers telling us and what people's experiences are elsewhere, in other types of retail, and try to make sure we're offering a compelling proposition.
I think that's well. It is answering the question in the sense of the answer you gave, which is you shifted from going back to always coming back to the customer and what is the customer expect.
Yeah, I think sort of what Bob was referring to as well is if someone asked me 2 years ago, are you going to have basically a marketplace on your site where you're going to be able to house effectively millions of SKUs so that the consumer can interface with your business in technically what's not a flash environment, I would say that's impossible. We don't have the technology to do that, and we don't have the ability to do it. When 24 months later, we're like, okay, we figured out through SPS how we could do it because we had no way to receive an EDI transmission, and we had no way to onboard this number of vendors, and let alone we weren't housing UPCs. So the whole thing, if you asked me 24 months ago, I would have said, well, that's completely impossible. We can't do it. We figured out how to do it, and because the platform is relatively nimble, we were able to do it because we saw that our in certain parts of our business, our customer wanted even more variety than we were displaying on a daily basis.
Makes sense. And Jim, just to kind of not necessarily on the future proofing side, but just as you're thinking about what's next, and I know you said some of it you don't know necessarily, but as you think about that, is it just kind of coming back to the customer, or are there other things that you're thinking about that you're setting up beyond the rack for kind of the next 5 years, 10 years?
I think the things that we look at is that the customer's ability to wait is what's changing the most, and that we have to be adept at fulfilling orders faster and responding to customers' questions faster than we ever have before. What people expected as acceptable, even 6 to 8 months ago, is totally different than it is now. Whether it's Amazon that changes the world or whatever people's view of normal is, that has changed dramatically. So, when Bob gets an EDI transmission, he has to ship those bikes within at least 48 hours because that's what people expect. Where 2 years ago, it was okay if you got your ship notification a couple days, 5 days later, 6 days later. Everyone's view of what is perfect is totally changed. And seamlessly, you have to be able to see that information on whatever device you're on the same way. It's no longer okay that the transmission you're looking at on a mobile device versus your desktop is different. To the customer, it has to be the same.
Yep, they're not. Unfortunately, we're all guilty of that, right? When we go back and do our own shopping, we're all definitely guilty of that.
Right.
Bob, would you anything different from your perspective? You're somewhat on the other side of the equation. Is it a similar conversation at Dynacraft, or can you talk a little bit about how you guys are thinking about future-proofing and future-proofing Dynacraft?
Well, I think that from our standpoint, we're trying to really have technology just be taken out of the equation, and so we can focus on relationships. So we want the answer to the technical challenges to be yes. And really, the use of challenge is probably not something I should even, have in my vocabulary. It's, these are all opportunities. And we want the scenario to be that whoever we're talking to, we're trying to grow our business. We're trying to grow our market position. And the technology is a means to get there. And getting the architecture right and getting the partnerships right is critical to that. So in terms of future proofing, we think we've done a lot. We've certainly got a lot going, and we've got big initiatives on the horizon. Whether that's opening a new distribution facility, on the East Coast, or that's bringing up that business to consumer presence where we have that direct one-on-one relationship with the end consumer. I mean, that would be something that is culturally that's not something that we currently have right now, because it's just not a channel that we have open. But it's not something we're afraid of. We feel like we've got the right solutions, we've got the right partners, and candidly, again, we're going after it. It's on the table. It's on our radar, and it's something that we'll bring online by the end of this year.
That's awesome. Thanks, Bob. I appreciate the perspective. I do want to take a few minutes and make sure I answer some of the other questions that have come in. And David, there's a question here I think might be a good one for you. It says, we are NetSuite users and SPS users. We have multiple web-based trading partners. We sell to Amazon. We sell to big box and local retailers. Are there NetSuite partners / SPS services that can communicate inventory information to our partners on a regular basis?
Okay, so to answer this, I'm going to assume that the question comes from somebody who's a supplier, a manufacturer, or vendor, and if inventory information is available out of your system, which if it's NetSuite, I assume it is, then absolutely there is a service we provide that allows you to take your inventory information and your item information and communicate it directly to your trading partners. So that is what we were talking about earlier in the presentation, a way to make sure you get really good orders coming through from your retailers. And some retailers are adept at this process and others aren't, so we want to look at who your trading partners are and what systems you have in place, but that is a pretty standard everyday piece of business that we do here at SPS.
And another one for you, David, is someone's asking, we're a small men's shirt designer, manufacturer, gross sale $3 million. How large do you have to be to engage in this kind of platform integration?
Great question. Well, Rhonda, our first customer in 2007 was a very small company that hadn't yet made its first sale. And so we helped them get their first retailer on board and their second and their third, and this is how it gets started. So there's very easy ways on our side, certainly, to get a very small company compliant and ready to transact electronically with their trading partners. The question about integration with the NetSuite world really is more a factor of how much volume are you doing, and does integration make the most sense for your current business climate and your current business conditions. And so we'll have some small companies that will integrate certain partners where they do a lot of volume and leave others non-integrated because they don't need to. So it's very common for somebody of your size to get into this at the ground level, and then we structure it to help you grow, and we grow together as you scale your business.
Makes sense. Jim, I want to ask a question that's coming in. I'll ask it to you first. The ask is, do the customer orders pass through you first and then back to the vendor, or does it go from the customer to the vendor and back to you?
It goes from the customer to us to the vendor. So we transmit the orders via an EDI transmission to the vendor.
Okay. And then, Bob, on your side, if somebody comes into Toys R Us, for example, and orders it, how does that interaction work?
Well, technically, with Toys R Us, if we're talking about ToysRUs.com and the dropship channel, they would make their purchase on ToysRUs.com. Technically, that order then would transmit to a group called Commerce Hub. Commerce Hub would then transmit it to SPS Commerce. SPS Commerce would then let me back up. It goes toys.com to SPS Commerce, SPS Commerce to Commerce Hub, into us. So there's a few partners in there, but again, from my standpoint, it's seamless. All I know is there's an order there, and I need to fulfill it, I need to ship it, I need to transmit an EDI 56 advanced ship notification, and it's done.
Great. So, Bob, and just I know we've got another minute or two here, so I wanted to give both you and Jim an opportunity. Any closing thoughts? And Bob, if you want to start, and then Jim, you want to go. Just any closing thoughts you want to share with the audience?
Well, I can say that I'm probably I was probably in a very similar position to many of the folks on the webinar today, but my decision at the time was looking at where we were at, what was limiting the business, what was a real risk to the business, and what needed to change from a long-term architecture standpoint, and really selecting the solutions and partners that would not only fix the issue, but also that represented a great long-term pick and alliance, because you just have to have that. So what we found with NetSuite and with SPS Commerce, with our WMS partner eBizNet, we've got a platform and an architecture that we've not seen anything that it can't do, and we believe we're very well positioned for anything really that business is going to require.
Great, thanks, Bob. And Jim?
I would say, I have less of a technical expertise, but from where I sit, I think that when you're confronted with a problem, you need to really rely on your partners and push them help them with the solution. And what I find sometimes even with our own organization is you'll have people that are more technically savvy than I am say, well, NetSuite can't do that, or SPS can't do it, and you really need to try to partner with them, and there are solutions that can happen, and just because you aren't doing something a certain way doesn't mean it can't be done. The systems are pretty flexible, and they're cloud-based, so they're designed that they can be adaptive to new business models. Thank you, Jim.
And really, thank you, Jim and Bob and David for your participation today. Just want to thank everyone for attending today. There will be a survey that follows when you follows the closing of the webinar. If you'll please take a moment to fill that out, we really appreciate it. Want to thank all of you for attending today, and we hope to speak to you in a future webinar. This webinar has been recorded. And we'll be making the audio archive available, the full archive available for future playing probably in the next week or so. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to speaking to you again.